All right. Good morning, Doug. I'd like to talk today about the collapse in systems and societies we see right now. There's a tweet thread on Twitter where a South African man went through all the disaster that's happening there. And at the same time, we see these things in the US. We see the train derailments, we see the factory fires, we see almost these collisions on the runway from these airplanes. Things are falling apart. Why?
Well, I attribute it to the 12 factors that built Western civilization, because Western civilization is solely and totally and entirely responsible for all these good things that we have that are now going into collapse. And maybe we can have a link to that conversation, or
I'll link to it.
An article about it or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
These 12 factors. And, we were talking about this before we got on briefly. You mentioned that it's, as Jesus said, by their fruits shall you know them.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is that all the fruits are going rotten right before our very eyes. I mean, it's not just that, art is kind of degraded, even though more expensive than ever. It's not that the music has no rhythm. It's so far from Beethoven that you can't even identify rap and hip hop as music anymore. So yeah, that's rotten too, in my opinion. And it's not just a question of being an old guy that always hates the young people's music. It's dissonant, in my opinion. I mean, I think that's an objective fact. It's actually dissonant and promotes values that are degraded. And in the physical infrastructure, which we were talking about before, it's happening slowly in the US. But there was an article in the Wall Street Journal today about how, even though the powers that be want to electrify the US, there aren't enough electricians around to do all the things that need to be done. In addition to the fact that the amount of these people who want electric cars running around everywhere have never computed, the amount of copper and cobalt and lithium and everything else that's going to have to be mined, which they don't like and which they're prohibiting. And to build more windmills, which is a stupid idea anyway, it takes an immense amount of materials to build them. And then you lose money on them, which means you're wasting capital. So despite all the good things that are happening and the advances in little pockets, the society's infrastructure, intellectual and physical, are both falling apart, the way I see it.
Well, I think moral too, because we're not even, and this is something that the people of the modern era believe that you shouldn't discuss this, just like you shouldn't judge music. You shouldn't discuss ethics. They think the ethics and that should be flexible, I guess. That not every family there's not a best family structure. You can have two mommies and two daddies, or three daddies, I guess, even anymore. And it's fine. It's just exactly as good as every other family structure. So I think the moral part might be the anchor to the whole thing, I think. What do you think about that?
Oh, I completely agree. And it's like these 25 rich urbanites that I talk to on a Zoom call every couple of weeks. I bring up the moral dimension of the problems that they like to discuss sometimes. And none of them acknowledge it. And I get absolutely no traction where anybody says, that's a good point. I just blow over it. And I torture myself going on that stupid Zoom call. I guess mainly because I want to reassure myself that things really are as bad as they seem to me. And I don't want to completely live in a bubble of people that see these things.
Yeah, no, you do need to see the other side of it. That's for sure. But I think the the basic thing that I think about when I think about the moral corruption of stuff is that we've talked about this before, that I see my personal view of debt is that it's debt. I see debt as unethical because you're taking from your future, whether it's, the US government doing it, taking from the future of all future citizens, or you as an individual, even you're stealing from your own future, unless you use that capital in some remarkable way that actually enhances, which is very rare actually in the consumer world. This is not what people do typically. So even that basic idea that it's cool and just and you deserve it to steal from your future, like that core anchor of moral whatever, I think is a disaster, and it leads to so many of these other things.
No, you're totally right, but it's actually worse than that, because not only are you stealing from your own future and making yourself into an indentured servant to whoever you're supposed to pay it back to, but most of the debt in the world today is not going to be paid back. And where did the capital come from that was lent to you to incur that debt? Well, it's the savings of other people. So some poor schlub saves money, the bank lends it out, it's dissipated. Hey, sorry, your money's not here anymore. So it's stealing from the past and other people as well as your own future. So that is really, it can be useful. But
Right.
The thing is that originally, the way banks used to work, commercial banks, is they would only lend, first of all, if you had complete coverage and had assets, and then they were generally lent against the crop. Crop was coming in 6 or 9 months or whatever it is. So you needed to borrow for the seed, and it was short term and fully secured. And the debt today, a great deal of it is long term, and it's not secured at all by anything.
Not at all. Not at all. And it wasn't used to to increase productivity or to create greater value. It's used essentially to live the fruits of your labors and of your labor from the future today, to like enjoy the spoils of the future right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the difference, which has pretty well been lost in finance, between a bond and a debenture. A bond was something that was secured by a specific real asset, in addition to the earning power of the corporation. But a debenture is not secured by anything except the good credit of the corporation. Nothing specific. So that's the.
There's no distinction anymore at all, is there?
No, not at all. Actually,
interesting. No. I didn't know that. Huh. So what does it say then when you have situations like in South Africa where, in this tweet thread, and I'll link to it so people can check it out if they want. It's shocking.
It's fascinating. Yeah,
something like 54% of the people, only have, is that what the number is? Something like that. So 64% of the people have access to fresh drinking water in South Africa right now, because the water processing is not, water, the plants and the piping, it's just not, the infrastructure is just crumbling. So it's not working.
Yeah, nothing works in South Africa anymore. It's funny. South Africa is only a generation behind Zimbabwe when it comes to total collapse of the society, because I was in Zimbabwe a number of times. In fact, my first book, The International Man, became the largest selling book in the history of Rhodesia, which is what it was then, because the Europeans needed a handbook to when they made the chicken, as they called it. And Rhodesia was a really nice place. Everything worked. Everything was clean. Everything was safe, except then the war ramped up and things changed, but things have gotten so much worse. And we'll go back to South Africa in a moment, but I think Zimbabwe is a predictor, if you would, for South Africa, because since those days, when there were about 250,000 Europeans there, many of whom had been there for generations, now, if there are 5,000 Europeans left in Zimbabwe, I'd be surprised. And, the last time I was there, the city is not neat and clean and orderly anymore. It's chaotic. But the thing that impressed me, one thing stands out in Harare, which used to be called Salisbury, is the central bank building. It is, well, there's the hotel, but that central bank building is by far the tallest. It must be a 30 or 40-story skyscraper, I'm guessing. And it dominates the city, the central bank building of all things, in a city that, has notoriously the worst money in the world. Anyway, so Rhodesia's been falling apart with roving bands, confiscating farms of white farmers, and then it all goes to seed. And places just a nightmare. There's so many anecdotal stories that I could tell you about Rhodesia, or Zimbabwe, if you would. But that Twitter feed that you found, which everybody ought to look at, it is absolutely fascinating, and it is absolutely true and realistic. And I say that because my wife is an Afrikaner, and she's got lots of relatives over there, and I've met all these people. Like, one of her relatives was what was his job exactly? He was an engineer, not the type that, drives the train, but lays the track and builds the foundations builds the railroads, that kind of an engineer. And of course, he was replaced with their Black empowerment program. And he was not a racist guy at all. He was, just a really decent guy. And I said, look, I'm telling you, there's this joke that's told about how when the Blacks get a position of power, they all get a pocket protector with a bunch of pens in it. At least at one stage, that was the thing, because it was a sign that you knew how to read and write and use the pens and all this type of thing. And he said, it's just impossible working with this guy, because he tries to give me orders and he actually doesn't know what he's talking about, because he's got no education and no experience. He's got political connections. Exactly what's happening here in the US, everywhere in the US.
Right. And basically it's the idea of promoting outside of a meritocracy, outside of competency, instead for whatever political lines, if it's racial or gender, whatever it is, like it's all those things. So as soon as you set those separate from meritocracy toward performance, it does sort of fall apart. But it's hard to, is it happening faster or slower in South Africa than happened in Rhodesia? That was faster because the war elements, I guess, probably.
Yeah, I think it happened much more quickly in Rhodesia, because the whites were, at that time, the total population was about 3 million. The whites were about 250,000. And now the total population is something like 15 or 16 million at least.
Wow.
So, the whites could see it was actually a race war that was developing. And so they all exited and took their knowledge and skills with them. Couldn't escape with any meaningful capital, of course. But in South Africa, we had a person on one of our file chats who's in the wine region of South Africa, which is just delightful still. But it's like the collapse of the Roman Empire. There were delightful parts, and then there were the majority of the empire, which was chaotic and dangerous. And same thing is happening, including South Africa. I'd suggest well, of course, the problem is you can't get money out of South Africa. It's a block currency country, and Americans are going to find that. Well, people all over the world are going to find it as their native country blocks currencies.
Can you explain what the practical effect of that is on South Africans, just so people can understand it more?
Well, if you're a South African, I mean, there are ways around this. If you have a international business, things like that. You can skate around it, but essentially, you're only supposed to use South African rand, which is a disastrously depreciating currency. And you can't change it for dollars or pounds or euros or anything. So you can get an allowance from the government to take a trip abroad and to do various things, but you can't expatriate your wealth wholesale.
You can't just freely exchange it for another currency and then ship it out.
So the same thing is going to happen. Same thing is going to happen here. We've had foreign exchange controls in the past here during the Nixon years. They were relatively mild, but even now we have foreign exchange controls where when you try to transfer money, I promise you the bank will ask, where did you get the money? What are you going to use it for? Blah, 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 blah. It's like it's not your money. It's like you have to get the approval of the bank, but the bank is really just working for the government. So that's coming. And as the economy gets more seriously deranged, the government will do something, and that's what they'll do. They'll try to control things more.
And they do it by trapping the capital.
In South Africa, it's true. The place really is becoming dangerous. It's not like Haiti. I mean, Haiti is in full and absolute and total collapse. The last time I was there was like 5 years ago. And my friend who runs a charity down there, which I've told her to close for years, she said, no, we have to have bodyguards. And so we had a couple of, impressively big and well-muscled guys carrying arms, driving us around in the car. But now it's much worse than it was back then. Much worse. I mean, you have to really be nuts to go to Haiti. And Haiti was just, as I've said before, a delightful place when I was there years ago. And South Africa used to be delightful too, but it's getting really, really dangerous and stuff doesn't work. And that list that chap put on Twitter, it's true, and it's fascinating. People should read that. And the question is, well, is it going to get better? In other words, maybe the South Africans will find Wakanda. Wakanda's right next door, I guess. And it's funny, that supposedly after the first Wakanda movie came out, there were lots and lots of American blacks that were called travel agents or airlines and said, I'd like to book a flight to Wakanda. I want to see it for myself.
Be nice.
It's very funny. But
Doug,
South Africa, all these African countries are going to continue going downhill. And I talk as somebody who's a big fan of Africa in lots of ways. And I still think if you're a young American in your 20s or 30s, certainly, or 40s, doesn't matter. I think if you want to make your fortune, you still should go to Africa for a lot of reasons that I've discussed in the past. But the place as a whole is not doing well. It lives on foreign aid and NGO aid. But these NGOs are counterproductive. They send hippies down there to inculcate the locals with all kinds of bad habits and that. And government money, which is basically the country's stopping off point, where the officials steal as much as they can and send the rest to Switzerland or the US or someplace. Yeah. So all over Africa is this way. I remember when I was in the Cameroon. Now, there's a country nobody goes to. Spent a week in the Cameroon. And we went to the presidential palace. And well, the first thing, of course, when you arrived at the airport, the French had put in a state-of-the-art for the time. What was the time the French would have put that in? Early 60s. With jetways and all this kind of stuff. It was all falling apart. None of it worked anymore. None of it worked. not only didn't it work, it was all dirty and it was actually shameful. And the presidential palace was, had a fence around it with gilded gates. I'm sure it was just gold paint. It wasn't, wasn't real gold, but it was all crumbling and falling apart, badly maintained, and the whole country was that way. And when we drove from the commercial capital to the political capital, which was about a 3-hour drive across, a lot of it was dirt roads. The largest form of traffic was logging trucks with these giant logs that they were taking down to the commercial capital to put on boats, cutting down the rainforest. Okay, Americans did it in America, Africans get to do it in Africa. Yeah, but Americans did it to build capital. The Africans are just doing it because steal the money and run to France or wherever they go. Now, Africa is, I think it's hopeless because it doesn't have the values, these 12 values that were critical to America and Western Europe being what they were. Now they're not anymore.
Yeah, it seems that when reading this tweet thread about South Africa, one of the biggest things that stands out is that it seems the disposition of the public is one of scavengers, really, rather than anything else. So they're basically going and stealing copper everywhere. They literally take the railroad ties away, and send them off for scrap metal recycling or whatever. When if a truck breaks down on a road, that looters come and clean it out. It's just I guess I don't know how it gets to that point where like the mentality of the people is such that the only way they can see their lot in life improving is if they can, basically pick up aluminum cans and take them to the recycle center. You know what I mean? Like some version of that.
Oh, well, that wouldn't be so bad.
No, it wouldn't. But
actually tearing up infrastructure in order to sell the.
Yeah, no, it's way worse. I understand.
For scrap, it's just amazing, and I think it's absolutely true. Like that mall riot. I guess it was about a year ago, right, where the South Africans just tore apart a mall, and I still haven't found out whether the people that own the mall have attempted to rebuild it.
Yeah, that's a good question.
But they'd have to be idiots to do that, because if it happened once, why isn't it going to happen again? Because nothing's better.
And even in that, Doug, there's this one scene on video where they have this like police van pulls up, the cops run out, go in, loot also, come back out with the stuff, throw it in the police van and drive off. It's like, it's not that I would expect the cops to do better, honestly, but it's just amazing. Everyone's in on it. Everyone goes, hey, this is an opportunity. It's like, there's no one resisting.
Yeah. In these third world countries, joining the police is almost as good as joining the army. If you want to, sometimes in some ways it's better as a chance for bribes and general corruption and looting and God knows what, and impunity from doing things because cops, your
thin blue line.
Yeah, that's right. Your first obligation is to your buddies, your fellow cops, and then to your employer, and only then to the public. They're just a nuisance. So the serve and protect thing, yeah, we still have it in the US, but that's falling apart, just like it's totally fallen apart in all of Africa.
Yeah. So how far ahead of the US is South Africa in this infrastructure decline?
Well, I'm not sure, but I don't think that in South Africa, there's any group that actively wants to destroy what's left. It's just falling apart out of stupidity.
Neglect and scrap. Yeah.
Stupidity, bad judgment, and lack of capital. Need the money to feed my family tomorrow or get some drugs or whatever. But maybe here in the US, there are people that actively want to destroy things because they want to, if you would, immanentize the eschaton.
Yeah. Well, the substation attacks, the shooting attacks on substations is a good example of that.
Yeah. And of course, that's being blamed on right-wingers. And well, they're not going to be Trump voting right-wingers, but there might be right-wingers out there. I don't know how you define. Oh, that's my main battle poodle. He's a very polite and thoughtful dog, but when there's any outsider that appears on the property, like the gardener, he can be relied upon to alert the
be alert and ready to go. That's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see, where were we before Oscar?
Well, talking about the basically the people shooting the substations being right wingers.
Yeah, so we have to define what are these right wingers. I mean, when it's right wingers, what does that mean? Well, I guess right wingers are supposed to be people that believe in traditional values, and maybe some of the people shooting out insulators at substations are really pissed off because traditional values are being washed away. And I don't know. We have to sit down and define exactly who these people are and what they're likely to do. I'm talking about the left wingers and the right wingers. Most of the people in the middle, just don't want to be inconvenienced, which is very understandable.
Right. Well, I again, it gets blamed on right wingers, but everything seems to get blamed, on, white supremacists, domestic extremists. That's what they say now.
Well,
right.
Yeah,
so that's just in that category.
If you're a crazy Antifa or BLM or, Marxist Leninist, you can do no wrong. Nobody will blame anything.
Exactly. So I don't really think that that's the right wing doing that anyway, but I mean, that is the allegation. We have seen that. To me, it's almost like whoever would be doing it are accelerationists fundamentally. Like they want the collapse to get underway, and maybe you could have some accelerationists on the right. I guess that's possible, where people just like, it's going to happen. Let's have it happen on our timetable.
Yeah, maybe you're right about that. Maybe it's like you watch zombie movies and you realize, you know what? If those zombies are going to attack, I want them to attack while I still have some stuff and I'm in my physical prime to fight them off.
Yeah.
Because if it goes on another 20 years, I don't want to be in a wheelchair when they attack. So maybe some of these guys are thinking that way. Yeah,
that's
on
possible.
Both sides.
It's possible. It's definitely possible. So basically, you're saying the biggest difference in timing wise between us and South Africa is that there's seem to be some forces in the U.S. that are actually interested in accelerating events or pushing. What's that Nietzsche quote? When you see someone teetering on the edge of a cliff, give them a push.
That which is about to fall deserves to be pushed.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's an understandable feeling. Especially today, when it's kind of in the air that something bad is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a lot of people say, well, if I activate it, if I immanentize the eschaton, maybe I'll have more control over what happens. Well, maybe.
Maybe. I don't know. It's a very complex system, unwinding it could be disastrous no matter where you're sitting at, I think. But what do you think? So what do you think the stuff we see in Zimbabwe now, for instance, they basically have planned rolling blackouts that, they call load shedding, that basically can have various areas out of power completely for 8 to 12 hours a day, every day. That's just kind of, so it's a managed decline of the entire system. Even if it seems like we're still a ways off from that in the US, unless there's some force that's coming after us, like whether it be a cyber attack by whoever, or it be the accelerationists of some way. But I guess I'm just curious that, if you were to put a guess on it, how long before the US, or maybe it doesn't happen at all, turns into a version of South Africa?
Well, in the past, and I haven't recently, like to mention the existence of the second law of thermodynamics, which is one of the few laws that I truly believe in. And basically it holds that all systems of whatever type degrade over time. And the only way you can keep them from degrading is with outside inputs of energy to keep them going. And like here in the United States, with the Biden regime is trying to greatly increase taxes for everybody of all types, which means that there's in effect less energy available to be used productively. All that tax money is just going to be frittered away, much the way it's done in Africa. Same thing.
Mm.
So what's the timing? How quick will it be? I think it's unpredictable, but the fact that everything is going in the wrong direction, everything seems to be accelerating. The only thing that seems to be doing well are these technologies, robotics, space exploration, biotech, nanotech, computer tech, et cetera,
Right.
those things, little pockets that, but meanwhile, everything around, and the problem is most people everywhere in the world, not just in the US, live in big cities. And it's a lot tougher. When things got tough during the Depression of the 1930s and 40s, well, it was tough, but not as tough as it could have been because most people were still on farms, which meant a lot of things. But now everybody's in cities and thinks milk comes out of milk cartons, and they don't know how electricity magically appears in that plug over on the wall. And it could really
Well, and we've seen it just during this COVID period, we've seen a big flight from these cities though, because I think in these, and if you think of a city itself almost as its own closed system, that it starts to fail because the energy required to keep the city going is so massive that it starts to fail faster. And you see it with like crime first. You see this, so a lot of people leave because of crime, or they might leave because of government rules or whatever, or taxes being too high. But there has been a flight to get people out because we see the decay there. In fact, when I'm just thinking about this as you were talking, there's a video I saw on Twitter of a guy standing on a street in St. Louis, and he stands there and he's loading his pistol. He's just standing there over over a homeless person who's sitting there on the curb. And he must be there for like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, like kind of fiddling with it, trying to get it right. And there are people watching this happen and they're filming it. That's how it got on video, obviously. And he just, then once he's got it right, he casually points the gun at the guy's head and shoots the homeless person in the head. Now that is the kind.
I'm surprised that wouldn't be everywhere. Is it? And I've just missed it.
Well, it might be a factor that the shooter was an African American guy and the homeless person was white. That might be a factor of why you haven't seen it everywhere. Wow. But it reminds me of what South Africa again. You see these crazy scenes of violence, random like that in some of the footage you might see coming out of South Africa. I mean, that kind of just brazen, fearless violence.
Yeah, that's interesting in that example you just gave about the one guy shooting the other, and it was black on white crime. That reminds me of the Scott Adams thing, the author of Dilbert, which is apparently being canceled almost universally, it seems, in the newspapers anyway.
Yeah, all his book publisher canceled his next book, and they abandoned his backlist too. So they're not going to publish any of his books anymore. So yeah, they've canceled him hard for it.
But my understanding, and I don't know what his political philosophy is that he was kind of a classical liberal who used to support liberal causes and all this type of thing. And then it's like a switch flipped in his head for some reason. I guess it was that Rasmussen poll flipped the switch in his head.
Yeah, I don't know if maybe he was just being provocative too, because he does do that also. So that could have
Yeah.
been part of it, and then it got out of control. But
Yeah,
I don't
I
know.
think he went a little bit too far, to be honest with you, but still, his point is not unreasonable.
He's yeah. There's actually they turned him into a meme that actually where it's he is the it's a meme about somebody pointing out the obvious, and so they have like scenes of like a bunch of like Antifa people they on their and their their headshots, I guess their mugshots going in the police station have like 3 of them in the background, and like they all look like losers. I mean, and then Scott Adams just there like this. See, like I'm pointing out the obvious, or that all, some people, or the guys who, the cops who beat up or who killed that guy in, or was it Missouri? I think it was, recently, or Memphis, I think it was. And, it's 5 black cops, and you have Scott Adams picture, in front of it going, just begin pointing out the obvious. And so, yeah, he's turned into a meme himself now.
Yeah. I wonder if we'll get to the actual truth of what happened with those 5 black cops with
Got it. No one wants to even cover the story anymore. It's not useful.
no, they don't. And it's not like it's like in Tom Wolfe's novel. What was that novel about? They made a movie out of it, which wasn't nearly as good, about the master of the universe that
Bonfire of the Vanities.
Yeah, exactly. Where the young black criminal is presented as an honor student, and it was funny the way it was transformed from a total loser to an honor student, and they do that. That's just the way the press works for a lot of reasons.
Yes, their own political reasons, I think, and business reasons, but either way, everything does seem to be falling apart, and I think that's the main point we're trying to cover here. And while we don't know how quickly we might get to the state of South Africa, and maybe we'll never get there, it does seem like things are on that trend, and it is getting your ability to basically rely on the basics is getting questionable, I think.
Yeah, and it's long been said that a fish rots from the head down. I don't know as a factual matter if that's true, but the analogy is good. And of course, since Mandela left, South Africa has been run by thieves and criminals, just the worst type. And they surround themselves. The people underneath them, 2nd and 3rd level down, are much worse than they are, because they're much more interested in stealing directly. And the same is true now that we have Jacobins with Bolshevik values in Washington, and they are entrenching themselves. And I can't wait to see, well, I guess I can, in 2024, to see if the Democrats win again, because then it's really all over. I mean, there's no coming back. And of course, the Republicans are worthless anyway. They're just wet dish rags. They're spineless. They're contemptible. They're hypocrites. And as I've said before, I actually have more respect for these criminal Democrats than I do for the Republicans, because at least the Democrats have a philosophy that's rotten to the core, but they observe their philosophy. And the Republicans kind of they say they do, but they don't observe it. So they look like hypocrites. They're worthless. Totally. They deserve to be flushed even worse.
Totally. And then as soon as you side with them, they do things like get as equally supportive of the Ukraine nonsense as the Democrats. So like, they're super eager to send American boys and girls to die in Ukraine. I think in the end, I think that they're totally fine with doing that. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Is there a meme floating around to reinstitute the draft in the US?
I haven't seen that yet. No, but it might be. Like, I haven't noticed it, but I think it's coming. I think it's definitely coming, because they're missing the recruiting goals, partially because they made it undesirable for young men to go into, because, the things that would call you, I mean, things that got me to join the army, it was like stuff that was demanding something more of me, like young men want to become more. And so, they've kind of abandoned that whole thing over the last 20 years. And then now it's gotten woke, and it's just getting way, way worse. So I think young men aren't interested. Then they flush a bunch of people out because of the vaccine stuff. And, they're missing recruiting goals.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd like to offer our listeners a dollop of good news, but I guess the next iPhone will be out on schedule. Is that good news? Actually, it's not good news because it's just going to tie people more and more to this artificial world where their inputs are provided to them by people that are badly intentioned. That's all the crap that comes across your iPhone, frankly.
Yep. I think maybe this is some good news though, Doug, is like our friend who lives in South Africa and lives in a place where things are good, and there will always be pockets of places where things are better because the people there fundamentally that are operating things, I guess, as we talked about with the Bible quotes, like you will know them by their fruits. Like if stuff is good and if it's improving, that's a great sign. So there are places like that. Just use this time to situate yourself in a place where that's true.
Yeah, or at least where things aren't obviously declining in the US.
Yeah.
So, as I said, I'm not a religious person, but for the northern summer, where I hang out in Virginia, there's a church about every half mile. You drive up the street. It's absolutely shocking, the number of churches. And, the values that are being promoted in from the pulpit. Well, I don't know if they're, who knows what an individual preacher is going to say, but at least there's some kind of values. And that's kind of good community.
I got to have it. I think it's critical. I think that's why everything's falling apart. Not to say those are the best values, that's the right way of doing it, but it's a total vacuum now, it seems. And that's the worst possible scenario. So, all right. Well, I think we'll leave it there for today, Doug. I'll include links to these, this Twitter account where people can read about how terrible things are in South Africa. And also there was a good article in Revolver News that kind of draws some parallels to what's happening in the US. So I'll share that as well in the description, and as well as your 12 characteristics of Western civilization.
Fantastic. Well, see you Friday.
A couple days. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Doug. Bye-bye.
But incidentally,